Thank you, Mr. President. My name is Taylor Pendergrass. I'm a staff attorney at the American Civil Liberties Union of Colorado. As many of you know, we wrote a 30-page letter to the city when the ordinances were drafted, and only a lawyer, I think, could write a 30-page document and still call it a letter. The city attorney's office has worked with us very closely in ameliorating many of the most serious problems that we saw with the proposed ordinance. However, I want to direct your attention to 4 unresolved issues in the ordinances proposed, and I hope that City Council will work with Mr. Broadwell to resolve these problems before the final ordinances are passed. These problems were laid out in a January 18th letter that we sent to all members of City Council. Mr. President, I have hard copies of that letter should council members need it, where I laid out in much more detail than I will be able to do so here some concrete examples of how I think these problems might impact free speech in Denver before the DNC, during the DNC, and after the DNC. And I'll touch on these 4 issues very briefly. The first is that the ordinance requires parade applicants to promise to pay in advance the costs of all policing for parades over 15 blocks. These are costs that could potentially be in the thousands of dollars. In First Amendment case law, we call that burden on speech something that might chill speech. And sometimes those burdens are justifiable. But in this case, we have requested public records from the city that shows the city has only actually charged these costs in 4 occasions, for the Parade of Lights and once for an MLK parade. So this really represents what I would call kind of the terrible twosome of a proposed regulation. It burdens speech substantially. It's going to prevent a lot of people from ever applying to hold a parade. But it doesn't really serve any purpose for Denver, such little purpose, in fact, that Denver has hardly ever needed to collect these fees. So we would ask that the city delete this provision. We're also asking the city to take a close look at whether fees should be refundable for parade applicants who apply for a parade but don't get it. We don't think it's fair for the city to pocket $50 or $150 for your constituents who apply for a parade permit, and then that parade permit is turned down. The city should return that money. We are also asking the city to take a very close look at the licensing requirements for huckstering, which I think probably comes from a phrase in the 1920s, which basically means that the city is requiring licensing for someone who wants to sell a 50-cent support Councilman Brown button or a 50-cent re-elect Mayor Hickenlooper. We sent our Ivy League educated attorney to the city's offices to try to get that license, and he couldn't. And we tell you that story in our January 18th letter. And finally, we're asking the city to ensure that parts of the park, of Civic Center Park, remain open throughout the entire DNC. And I applaud Taste of Colorado and Ms. Dorr and other representatives here for working with the city. We think that compromise still needs to be discussed, and hopefully all of Civic Center Park can remain open to free speech during the DNC. Thank you very much.
Thank you.